late and we have a feed, so I want to make sure that anybody who happens to be watching from home isn't disappointed and impatient. So this is the first one of 2015, which, as a lot of you know, is the very first of our 15th year of hosting these things.
All right.
And a lot of you guys have been here. So, yeah, okay. Thank you. And it's, you know, as I always say, it's the community that makes it happen. And it's wonderful to be associated with all you guys and be in touch all these times. So our speaker today, I'm going to leave his credentials to himself. The title of the talk is How Many Hammers Do I Need? And please welcome Jeff Copeland.
So I'm going to talk a little bit about our tool sets, a little bit about how I think we're tripping over our own feet. Some of what I'm going to say is going to be controversial. Please feel free to push back. Part of the reason I'm doing this talk is I want to challenge my own assumptions, and I want to bounce ideas off of people. So, you've seen these, right? Every damn website has a flock of these things attached to them, because we've got, what, 417 different social networks with interlocking and overlapping purposes. This infographic, I think, is the simplest explanation of why they're all different and why they're important. Corey Smith nailed this one. I don't care. I think bacon's cool. I don't have to tell everybody that bacon is cool. But it's not just the social network stuff that gives us too many choices. We've got too many programming languages, really. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that book in the bottom left corner. That's it's 50 years old now. Jean Sammet wrote it just before she became president of the ACM. It's an encyclopedic treatment of all of the programming languages that were in practice and some of which had fallen out of use by 1968. It was 800 pages long. It would be 4 volumes or 7 volumes if there was a revised edition now. Right? That's sort of the map of the interesting programming languages, I think, of the last 50 or so years. Tony Hoare made the observation that Algol 60 was sufficiently advanced that it wasn't only an improvement over its predecessors, it was in fact an improvement over some of its successors. Algol 68 was the language he was thinking about when he said that.
Yeah, that's my grad professor shouldn't say that.
You know, Pascal, which is a lovely teaching language, falls out of Algol too. Many of you have probably read Brian Kernahan's paper, Pascal is not my favorite programming language. Right? It is too strongly typed, right? It's got those problems. What you may not know is that Brian, when he wrote that paper, was working for a guy named Ted Delata, who was head of the Unix Systems Group at Bell. Ted was later a mentor of mine, and when I was working for Ted, he handed me a copy of the original draft of the paper, which was entitled Pascal, the thalidomide victim of programming languages. Good taste and lawsuits prevented it from being published under that name. The important superset of Algol 60, of course, is Simula, right? Because that's where we invent object-oriented programming. That's the first real use of object-oriented programming. And so from C and Simula, we get C++, which is a mashup of a lot of ideas, but had some mistakes, which got solved by Java, which would have been just fine, except for Sun and Microsoft getting into a legal and technical battle, and C# having to be invented. My argument is that those three languages are equivalent. That we really need one of them, not all three. The fact that Sun and now Oracle and Microsoft are in this ongoing argument about Java. Now Oracle and Google in an ongoing legal argument about Java, and who can implement a Java virtual machine and under what circumstances and why. The net effect is that C++, which is deficient in some ways, ends up being the implementation language of choice for a lot of things, just because everybody knows it's free and clear. Okay? So that's one example, right? We've got problems with similar choices in web platforms, right? If Pascal is the thalidomide victim of programming languages, JavaScript is the acid head.
Mhm.
Okay? And then there are all of the libraries that people hang off of Java, right? And frameworks. How many configuration management systems do we need? How many version control systems do we need, right? I keep revisions of my resume in SCC, no longer in SCCS, and not in RCS either, nor in CVS, nor now in Git, actually, finally. But similarly, right, my resume has migrated over the years from TROF to Tech to Microsoft Word because that's the form that everybody wants to see it in, right? Despite the fact that it's, again, it's the VHS to beta. And then my personal annoyance is the soft keyboard on my phone, which reformats itself depending on context, and I can never find the comma key. Why do you care? Why do I care? Here's the central argument. And you guys aren't pushing back. This is, I'm surprised that.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. No problem so far.
You got a long leash.
Okay, guys, he wants us
Okay.
to push back.
So, the profusion of tools means that it's harder, if you're a manager, to find people who know the right tool. If you're not a very bright manager, your reaction is, oh, I want somebody who knows exactly that tool, not the variation. Right? And we've all seen that happen. But it's also harder because of the layers of the different tools to make sure that we've made correct software. As the stuff gets more complicated, it's less stable, it's less supportable, it's less testable, and as we've discovered in the last year, it's more hackable. Okay?
Could you almost draw a parallel, like a cyclomatic complexity to the tool levels?
You could. I can certainly make, the more layers I have in my web stack, for example, the more complicated interaction I have getting from that keystroke to can send me the web page. Right? Much more stuff that can go wrong. So, good point.
I might be stealing one of your next slides. If so, just say, hey, hold that thought.
Okay, I will.
To me, one of the reasons why I care is that I think with so many different tools and languages is what one good example. There's a big dilution of expertise. You can't master so many different things, so you have fewer people having the time to develop a deep expertise in the right stuff. If there was more concentration on a common set of tools.
Well, the conversation Matt and I were having over pizza was I was extolling the virtues of various scripting languages, and the problem I've been having in the last 6 months is my fingers still want to type Perl, but I'm writing in Python, and that damn semicolon is just in the wrong place.
Yeah.
Perl font.
It's kind of like,
Perl font. I like that.
it's like when you rent a car. It's like, where's the light switch?
Well, yeah, or which side of the car is the gas tank on this week? Yeah.
More importantly, at least there's a standard of where the brakes and the gas are. Perhaps there's maybe a corollary.
Well,
so quick little observation.
Sure.
On your chart of programming languages, the one that was grayed out on the bottom and middle was Ada. That was supposed to have solved, at least for the DoD, because I was there at the time, and we wound up writing everything in C++, but because those were about the same time, if I remember correctly.
right.
But Ada was supposed to be the be-all, end-all. It does everything. Why do we need anything else?
Right.
And it's not. I think the aviation industry uses it, but I don't think anybody else.
Well,
does.
the
Military doesn't.
Military, the DoD went so far as to say we're not going to bother using Ada. We're going to make chipsets specifically to run Jovial, which predates Algol. So. PL1 is a similar case, right? IBM came up with PL1 as an answer to Algol, and the only people who used it were IBM for a couple of small systems programming things. Right.
And of course, we all know that bliss is ignorance.
That takes us all back.
So on the other slide, when you say, why do we care? Who's we? Like, do you mean as a society?
No, I mean as computing professionals.
Okay, all right.
Right? I'm not going to solve global warming.
That's the next presentation.
Right. Today my rallying cry is simplification.
Okay.
Okay. Which is the answer to how do we fix it, right? Exactly what we have to do is we have to sit down and figure out what the minimal number of tools we need are. We don't want, why do we need both Jenkins and Hudson for, right? Two identical tools which are almost but not quite completely incompatible with each other. Right? So,
One thing I would say is, like Donald Reinertson would say, in software, variation leads to innovation. And it may be that when we have this variation, it may help us to solve a better problem. Could.
Yeah, there's a trade-off between innovation and efficiency.
Right.
And in our scalable, data-centric, multi-geo, professional approach,
right.
I think we've gotten past the, okay, here's the minimum feature set to be a computer professional, so driving to what we would experience to be efficiency, here's our short list.
Right.
There have been multiple streams that have tried to reach their own conclusion on that, hence the diversity. So
Okay.
it becomes a tool belt or set versus a you can only use
These things, right? Well, which harkens back to the languages slide where we had the choices of the COBOL cloud or the Fortran cloud, right?
Right.
Depending on which, back in those days, which camp we were in. There's an Occam's razor point here too, right? Which is, yes, the diversity is good, but there's a point at which we should make things simple, but no simpler than necessary.
Right.
Okay.
Well, think of the simplicity in Darwinian terms, that we have a variety of tools. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead. No, I was going to raise evolution in a minute.
Sorry, right. Well, which tool works better, and why do you prefer these tools? And so some of them fall into obsolescence. I don't see anybody doing COBOL, for example. So
There's a COBOL up right now.
You didn't work at IDX. Huh? We
I'll just stop there.
At our time, because all our programmers died, and we couldn't find new ones to do football.
Yeah, but a lot of it seems to come down to goals, because they have had lots of debates this year, in particular in the open source communities, because of the System D discussion in Debian that kind of flamed up or whatever, and people were debating about, okay, we've got different groups of people with different goals in mind, right? And the projects are controlled by certain individuals, they have certain goals in mind, and the question of whether innovation can be introduced into that project depends on whether the people who control that project share those goals. And the reason forking happens, the reason people invest in these other tools and other projects, they have different ideas and different goals in mind. And that's what causes a lot of the fragmentation. I guess what you're focusing on is how do you heal it later?
Yeah.
How about related to that, the shiny object syndrome? It's like, oh, new tool, new tool.
Well, and that, as a program manager, as a test manager, I've had exactly that experience. It's oh wait, it's shiny, it's new. We want to do C#6. Yeah.
Well, I'm wearing my computer historian hat, then we end up reinventing the wheel way too many times. The first time that I looked at Go, somebody asked me for an evaluation. I said, oh, that's Emerald. So it's essentially the Emerald operating environment from the early 1980s. And it just has a new name and a little bit new syntax. The fundamental ideas, going back to this idea of what is the need, it's identical.
It's 30 years old, really. Wow.
So, clearly we don't want to get here, right, where we have one choice of everything. There was a political routine the other morning, and it seemed appropriate to drop it in there. I'm not sure that that's a reaction to the paucity of new stuff at this year's CES.
That's brilliant. That slide is brilliant.
Really? It seems like there's an overwhelming variety of those things, though. I don't know. I guess there are other gorillas, but
right. I think that's a statement about that. That is a statement about the gorillas, right?
This is just a way to abstract it, so 10 years from now, this same thing can be shown.
Right. Yeah.
Their hairstyles will be different. But.
I think Tom Coles has been using the same hairstyles for 50 years. So here's sort of this is part of the punchline, right? Simpler is better. We need Occam's razor to help us trim down our list of tools, right? A simpler set is better, but no simpler than necessary, right? That last note, marketing really does count, unfortunately, right? It comes back to the Java versus C# thing, right? That's a marketing battle. My experience at the last project I worked on at Microsoft was a thing called Windows Driver Frameworks, which was a very well thought out way to build a set of tools for building device drivers. great idea, lovely technology. We put a lot of thought into it. Nobody rebuilds a device driver, right? A device driver is a loss leader, right? So it was the right solution for the wrong market, or the right solution targeted the wrong place. People are writing new device drivers in WDF, using WDF, but not. Nobody's going back to rewrite them. So,
Except for the guy that rewrote all the samples. That guy.
right. Well, yeah.
He really liked it.
Elias, was that his name?
Elisha, yeah. Well, that was. He started as the test guy in that team,
Mhm.
and wrote the complete set of samples, and ended up moving into development because he had so much. He was the guy in the team who had the experience actually writing the device driver.
Exactly.
So this, going back to Tony Hoare, this is a thing he said in his Turing Award lecture, right? Fundamentally, you can. There are two ways to approach building a piece of software, right? I can make it so complicated that I can't prove that there are problems with it, or I can make it simple enough so I can prove that there are no problems with it. My call to arms to us as software professionals is to keep our tool set simple enough so that the interactions are simple enough so that we can prove our software correct. We can test it and keep our systems sane and together. So, and I think you guys pushed back almost none. I was planning on much more pushback than that. And so
We got lots of pushback to go here.
okay, yeah. So yes, do. So now you can push back.
I agree.
That's not pushback. Right?
Well, in terms of software automation, about simplicity, I would agree with, is applied towards, for example, automating for quality. There's many tools out there. I actually thought you were going to talk about those tools. Anyway, there are many tools out there. The ones I've used are all crap. Correlation. Anyway, it's complexity that does not serve the interest of product software quality, which is why,
Right.
Actually, it was my book I was talking about. I mean, it's implemented in C#, but it's platform independent. You can do it any language you want, and language independent. Just automate the product in the same language as the product, and have that be basically, you make sure you're not losing any information back from the product. And so when your test fails, you have all that information handy. With tools interceding, then you're going to lose information almost inevitably. And there are other points of failure, extra points of failure you don't know about, other things that can get in the way. So this simplicity is applied towards software quality. It's kind of the same value as what you're talking here about.
Right.
Software.
Well, the route to quality is simplicity. Is another way of putting that.
But not too simple.
Yeah, because I mean, you're going to run. The problem is you run into scenarios that the simplistic model doesn't solve, right? And you have to add the complexity for whatever new feature because there's something that the simple tool doesn't work for. You add that layer of complexity in. You get disagreement with the people who own it. Maybe you can't modify it, so therefore you have to create your own that actually solves the scenario that you care about. And that's where this happens. But like, how do you all get together and agree to converge on X, Y, or Z?
And maybe those choices have to be, or those decisions have to be made within our individual organizations, right? We probably. Certainly, there are going to be the occasional shop that still wants to use COBOL for sufficient and good reasons, crazy though they might be. And there's no point in forcing them to move to C# or C++. But within a single organization, you can say, you know, we're going to restrict ourselves to C++ and Python, or you know, and our web stack is going to only use these libraries, these JavaScript libraries.
Provided they can do it. I mean, it's kind of like if you have a workman or something, and he's got his big box of you know, woodworking tools. Okay, he's got things that are very specific, but they can't be used for anything else. And they work perfect, and they're the best for that item. So now when we try to throw in the kitchen sink, right, now all of a sudden you have your complexity. And they're trying to get best of everything in there or whatever, where maybe you need a whole bunch of separate tools where it really is best, or you come out to something where you're saying like they settle for good enough.
So maybe it's sufficient to build a set of you know, in my experience, when I'm backed into a corner where I need the specific thing, right? I build a specific jig for, you know, putting the screws in those particular places on the piece of woodworking.
Sure.
Right? Maybe it's the case that what we need to do is build specific jigs for this class of web problem. Yeah, right. For this class of programming problem within our own shop. But not, you know, not try and make them standard
globally.
not try and change the position of the pedals on the car.
Well, show of hands, how many people worked at Amazon ever that are here? Anyone? And what's amazing is that they have almost every group has a different bug tracking system.
Good.
Oh, and, I mean seriously, because and Bezos, I don't know if it's still like this or not, but I was there, you know, quite a while back. But one of his core principles was frugality breeds ingenuity. Like, let's not buy a tool when we can invent it ourselves. We'll learn something.
And so everybody invented their own.
Everyone invents their own thing, and so that guy's out of that group now. And
So
it's
how's
like
the
we need
tools
to
maintenance
modify
division?
it, but we can't. So we got to now invent our own, and it's wild.
There's
And it can stifle innovation. I was in a conversation today where we were talking about test case management tools. And one of the managers said, I'm really reluctant to adopt, basically her message was, I'm reluctant to adopt anything. Because twice she had adopted tools that were then abandoned, and she had no support, and it was a dead end. The tools had no way to export their meaningful information. And so they pretty much just had to start from scratch.
okay, but
With spreadsheets.
Yes, but is there a test case management tool out there that doesn't kind of suck?
And one of the criteria there is that it has a break.
For less than, say, $100,000, right?
It's true.
That much.
I'm hearing silence.
I was gonna say TFS, but I said, well, I don't know, I've never bought
Anyhow, how many more slides? We don't want to stop you too much here.
no.
Okay, I want to make sure we don't
No,
stop.
go ahead. No, we've got time.
Two things that this has kind of kicked into my mindset
Okay.
is an analogy of physical tools. Hammer begets
Wrench.
and you know, branching through various different types of hammers and you know, everything's a nail. Great. Now we come up with the idea of the screw, and you know, gosh, that's great. We got a screw and a screwdriver, and that works for a lot of things. No simpler until we get to the idea of, oh, well, what kind of, you know, slot versus Phillips. Phillips has its problems, but through evolution, it's gotten enough mass adoption that it's used more than square drive and forks and everything, most other types. But the screwdriver itself is the tool everybody uses until they get carpal tunnel and realize, oh gosh, I can use a drill. Oh, now I need to go lots of different places, so I need a cordless drill. And so forth. And a lot of that has been innovation that.
But that's where evolution comes in, not
right.
I'm no longer writing in Fortran.
Right.
Yeah, you no longer need your manual screwdriver or something in that analogy.
Right. And you don't, if you're in certain trades, you don't need to carry around a Torx bit set or a square drive bit set, because in your industry or profession, everything you see is Phillips or hammers, or excuse me, nails.
Right.
In which case, there you go. So depending on the trade, and especially the shops, I think each software company can do a lot to save themselves by having an architectural forum that discusses and looks at the different stuff ahead, looks at what the projected needs are, cost benefit, how did it work for these other folks, gosh, I like that jig that these guys have been using for a while, let's adopt their jig. But you don't have cowboys interjecting that stuff in the middle of the production products, which gets right to that boat track issue.
It leads to 900 different
So
operating systems or a test automation tool that nobody can support.
Yeah, interesting thing is, like, my wife, she kind of complains to me. She says I'm a pack rat, because I just don't have time. I don't think it's important to clean up my junk, right?
It might be useful.
So she'll tell me something like, yeah, you can go ahead and go to Nordstrom and get new clothes, but you have to throw away some first. And that might be kind of the trimming or something that might be,
right.
New
what does
tool.
this new tool do?
Yeah, instead of us trying
The
to
other tool
support
doesn't,
both,
and
What can we replace?
Yeah, back to the fine woodworking point you made there, then management goes out and brings in a bunch of stuff from IKEA. And all your tool set is basically doomed.
Well, the model, the physical model falls apart.
Exactly. My tool set gets very simple. I just have an Allen wrench.
And it strips out right away.
In the physical model, right, you're not constructing a house that's fundamentally incompatible with screwdrivers and nails, right? It doesn't matter what type of hammer you use, you can adjust on a given house. But in the virtual world, you can build a house that's fundamentally incompatible with a hammer. You can only use some weird device to maintain the house. Right. And that's kind of the big problem we've got. And that's why this is more important, I think, in this world to converge and compress the time it takes to evolve the tools, because otherwise...
Okay, so how do we compress the time to evolve the tool?
Yeah, I don't know, but I'm just saying it's important to do it.
Okay, that was my second point. The hammer and screw analogy is pretty accessible, but looking at the other analogy, exactly, evolution of species on this planet, you can see there's some winners and there's some losers, but there is just a ton of variety, and it doesn't necessarily converge. With the temporary, the current exception of humans.
You can't have evolution without variability.
Right.
Yes.
Right?
Right.
Yes.
And 99% of the species that have ever existed, 99 point something, they're all dead. They're gone.
Right.
Right.
So looking at that model,
and we're losing some number every
So
year.
to get your evolutionary improvement, you have to have variability.
Right.
And maybe we have to just eat the complexity along the way.
So is there a mode where we should maybe not hop on to new tools too fast? Because, whatever that curve is, it shows how often technology doubles its power, but our expectation is shorter than that. It's kind of like you want a new phone before your contract is up. And it's almost like we jump onto new tools before we need them, because we still have a useful lifespan of our old tools. And if we wait a little bit longer, maybe we'll realize that the new tool was
part of why this notion resonates for me is that I have a tendency to hold on to old tools. I've never wanted a new phone before my contract was up. My children keep saying, but we've had that DVD player for 3 years now. Don't we need a new one?
It's obsolete.
Right, it's obsolete.
What about the 3D
You need Blu-ray player.
Who's using DVDs? Seriously.
And I think to that point, it really comes down to an individual or team or shop exploration of what's our current pain point, what's the pain threshold, and what's the benefit of trying out this new tool or these other solutions, or building or extending an existing tool set. So just making sure that's thought through with some architectural perspective rather than just, let's try 3 tools in here, see which one wins, and we end up with a bit and piece of those in our process.
So in a universe where you can free up an architect to explore the tool set.
Mm-hmm. Or perhaps another idea is to help expand the expertise or the skill set of the developers in a particular team by delegating that role. Hey, gosh, 10% of your time or 20% of your time is actually spent listening and hearing what pain points we have and exploring around to see what might be able to fix it. You go bring it in. In fact, this
Which
is
works
what our
until
team-
somebody takes that 20% and goes off and makes Gmail, but that's.
That's true. That's true. But that's actually what our team does, is we come up with process improvements and say, oh gosh, here's a pain point. I don't know how to solve it. And some other folks come up with an idea, or somebody says, I want to spend some time looking at it. And they go off and do it, come back, and then everybody goes and uses the scientific method and basically tries to tear it down and say, gosh, how is this not going to work for us, or what are the hidden costs going to be? If it still shakes out, we'll pilot it and then look at adopting it towards a production use.
So that could lead to more variability when they come back and say, here's another tool.
Well, it's getting piloted
All right.
after it's met initial team review
Well,
and
but
peer
then,
review.
then we have to rely on your wife's rule.
Right,
But
right.
the
Throw
architectural,
something out of the closet.
so the architectural or strategic process is democratized. So like you said, we don't necessarily have architects available to do this, but we do have people that are smart and wanting to grow their skill sets, and this is a way to sort of meet that need and at the same time be more critical as to how big we make the tool belt, so not every developer's dragging around hammers.
So it seems to me there's 2 aspects of tool proliferation.
Okay.
One of them is when people choose to build new tools, right? So like you've got a brand new tool that you think needs to be made because the other one doesn't meet the needs that you thought it should fulfill or whatever, right? But nothing's really been built with that tool yet. It's just kind of new at some point, and some people are like, oh, that's cool, I'll try it out, So that's one aspect, is like tools proliferate just because people want build new things that need to be done to solve scenarios.
Right.
Then the other way tools seem to proliferate is when projects are created, right? You need a tool to go build something, right? And it seems like some of these newer weird tools that seem to proliferate happen because you'll have someone on a team that has a pet project or a prototype, let's say, right? And they want to use this clever new tool that they came up with, or even something that they just happen to be really familiar with. It's not what the rest of the team uses, but hey, it's a prototype, right? They'll go off and they'll build something in this non-standard utility or whatever, and then that'll take on a life of its own. And that project now has increased the usage in the current installed base of that tool, like what projects depend on the tool. And the project is effectively bound to that tool for its lifespan. In the case of a language, for sure.
Right.
In the case of other tools, not so much. And really, that's another interesting
Some
thing.
funky library that somebody.
Right.
And there's a third variation of what you just proposed, which kind of goes to the evolutionary adaptability thing, which is the universe. Cloud is coming very quickly, and so enterprise corporations are now going to have to choose between on-prem, off-prem, and that changes the whole
Well,
complexity
which leads to a whole different
Exactly.
complexity of libraries that we need to adopt and tools that we need to adopt, yeah.
So that underlying, okay.
It's
how
not
do
just
we-
the
Now, what is the new baseline definition of what we're trying to achieve, and how does that intermingle with what corporately or, collaboratively with, multiple vendors contributing to the same thing? Yeah.
Well, I actually question whether we have a cultural aversion to simplicity. Because we're smart people, right? And we want everybody to know we're smart, especially the other smart people around us. I like Python. When I first discovered Python, I said syntactically significant white space is just brain dead simple. It makes you write code that is readable and maintainable. I like this. It eliminates so many problems with this one idea.
You still like Python? Do you still like Python?
Oh, I love Python.
Oh, okay.
And so many people I know, oh God, syntactically significant white space, that's just a dumb idea. You don't have any flexibility. And And no, flexibility is your enemy in this case, which is why you end up with dangling else's and why you don't know where your flow of control went.
That's what a compiler is for, and I was discussing.
But the compiler, the thing is, compilers can let you do stupid things, especially in very expressive languages.
Well,
like
not
C++.
many stupid
But certainly in the scripting languages like Python and Perl, the interpreter will catch some of the stuff that will catch the stuff that the compiler would catch.
No, wait, so let's be clear. Most of the interpretive languages don't catch half of what a strongly typed compiler will check.
Like 10%, Keith, 10%.
Strictly calling
Yeah.
Python an interpretive language, it compiles to a bytecode.
I know, but it's a dynamic language.
It's a dynamic language.
So dynamic languages versus strongly typed static languages vary in how much the compiler can help you or the interpreter.
But when I look at this one specific problem of writing maintainable, readable code, I think that it's an enormous step forward to accept that languages impose syntax, and this is the syntax that this language imposes, and it solves this class of problem. And the pushback that I get from so many people is, oh no, we're smarter than that.
No, you're not. Sorry, you're not. It's that simple.
They're smarter than that they don't need to have their head held, and yet, you debug code like that all the time. Oh, you have this in the wrong place.
Earlier I was talking about my fingers wanting to type Perl rather than Python,
Exactly.
and part of why I've been consciously making that transition is because I do want my hand held, because there are an awful lot of times when I have written myself into a corner in Perl, right? Yes, it's a lovely expressive language. My brain wraps itself very nicely around regular expressions, and every other thing in Perl is a regular expression. But debugging that write-only regular expression is enough to make me pull out my hair.
Write once, read never.
That's my favorite Dilbert cartoon where Ratbert creates a web browser. He's dancing on Dilbert's keyboard, and I always say Dilbert was running Perl.
Well, and similar to the cultural aversion to simplicity, I think in some organizations there's a cultural aversion to reuse. That it's, I felt victim of this myself at the time where it's I can create a new tool and get a nice review, or I can just use an existing tool and then that's not impressive and that's just meeting expectations.
Okay.
And so I think that we want to create a new tool to show off.
We're basically differentiating ourselves. It's the same reason why companies sell new tools. It differentiates them. Consulting practices have to make sure that their tool set looks different than the other guys.
Tool set.
Not me here.
Or their school, quote unquote.
Well, part of what Python has made inroads into places where Perl was embedded before goes exactly back to that marketing thing. There was this promise of a Perl version 6, which never actually happened, right, in any real way.
Or Python 3 versus Python 2.
Right.
Yeah. Do you guys remember when we used to shop for software at Egghead, and you would compare the boxes, which one had more checks on the back of it?
Well, yes, and there was a separate rack at Egghead for each CPU type.
Yeah.
Maybe in resolving the diversity of tools, you see something that is more higher level than a tool, like a more abstract idea. Like, why would I use this tool? Well, when I have these other tools, what does this tool do better? How does it differentiate? How am I going to be more productive? And what's the business?
And I think those are the questions that as professionals we have to ask ourselves when we make those decisions.
That brings up an interesting point. One of the ways to help keep the diversity from getting out of hand too far is more discoverability for evaluating existing tools. And to me, knowing a bit more about the tool, where it came from and where it's likely to be going, at least at this point in time, that's actually a very, very difficult thing to do right now.
Right.
And that's actually part of why I made my talk last year about tools, and I wrote a whole categorization scheme and figured out, okay, here's the idea, your brain being the most important tool because it tells you can use that to determine which tools make the most sense in the context that you're currently facing.
Okay.
And testing like that, man. I do like your how many hammers do we need topic, but it's very nice correlation there. If you can discover the number of tools that apply to your situation, it'll help you pick one versus just making your own or choosing something that's already dead-ended and you end up keeping it alive because you happen to make the wrong decision. You didn't know about the other one that's already won.
Right.
That I think would really be a serious
Well,
help.
that comes back to the unfortunately there are marketing considerations, right?
Right, and that would be a good mitigating factor to marketing, is to be able to see what adoption there is and what communities have picked up without necessarily having a big bend spin on it.
And I think what Jeffrey's point is that the diversity itself has cost, because
Oh, yes.
if we're in the same team and you're using that tool, and I don't like that, you're using A, I like B better. Well, then, you know, what happens if one of those gets hit by a bus, and then, you know, I don't know how to do A, I don't know how to do B, well, that's where all this stuff.
I gotta maintain this guy's code, he wrote it in B. What the heck?
No, you wrote in B++.
You sure it's not B sharp?
Yeah, so what about like tool suites? Like when you buy something that has, you know, like the whole kitchen sink with it? And I see.
And out of those, you know, which subset of that suite do you install?
There's that's true, but I mean, like when you're thinking about, you know, does your test case management system have bug tracking in it, have source control in it, have, you know, it's like, where does this go now? So then you could say, well, if I buy this suite, that company is going to maintain it for me and give me all the upgrades I ever need. On the other hand, now I'm locked into that suite.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
We're locked into that service now.
Right.
You're paying a monthly,
Well,
whatever charge.
If
For all
they do
the-
their
for all-
job right, yes.
For all the stuff I don't use.
Yes,
Right.
that's what they want.
well, you know, this is Adobe moving from Photoshop in a box to, you know, $12 a month for the service.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or the what I call the Atlassian tool suite, which is all
Right.
pretty much monthly service charge.
Right.
Bitbucket, Git, Jira.
Right.
So there's
That
a,
Confluence.
Well, out of that, you know, Jira is the one you typically don't really care about.
Jira and or Bitbucket,
Yeah.
Maybe
so there's a cost to, obviously, you know, adding new tools to, you know, get more hammers or something, right?
Right.
But at some point, then sometimes a new hammer will come out that has a payoff. At what point, you know, is there a good heuristic, I guess, for when to evaluate that new hammer and decide that it's sufficiently more powerful than the old tool for my use cases, that I'm willing to expend the known costs for having to retrain and or limit my subset of known engineers that can wield the tool because it's new or something like that, and pay that cost because it's so valuable to me in this particular use case, right?
Well,
Like,
I don't know.
does it have to be 2x better? Does it have to be, you know, an order of magnitude better?
Yeah, wouldn't you just do a simple return on,
I was gonna say,
simple
yeah,
return on investment
investment,
analysis?
yeah.
And simple is never the
Right.
thing, because you always.
Intentionally do that evaluation.
Right, intentionally.
And not
It's
version
never
one.
I mean, that's the problem, is it's the proliferation today is unintentional usually.
Right.
Yes.
And not version one.
But yes,
So the way that I solve that with computers is I just avoid replacing it as long as I can. Same thing with a cell phone. Mine's almost 4 years old. It's like, I bought it, I'm gonna use it, it's fine until it isn't fine. And at that point, I don't care how many generations of improvements have been made. I'm definitely not, hey, get the next thing, hey, get the next thing, shiny.
Right.
And that's
Yeah,
been
well,
working for me with
you'll-
hardware. But I don't know about software, it's harder to see.
And business competition can help accelerate that decision a little bit, right? If someone else gets more efficient than you really quickly, and it's because they have a tool advantage, you might have to reevaluate.
That's a lot of what it is,
Yeah,
actually.
yeah.
Yeah.
That is why there's proliferation of tools,
Right.
is people are finding advantage and becoming more efficient. I upgrade more often than you, probably because I do video processing, which burns up all the CPU all the time. And if it's 2 years later and it's 2 times faster, it cuts my time in half.
Right, because
So-
you feel the pain.
Yeah.
Right.
And
He's,
I know,
he's working
because
with it and it's fine.
Yeah.
You're probably
He's
just
not
using
feeling the
editing.
pain.
Yeah, I don't care about the video stuff.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So it depends, but interesting thing on the hammer is, you guys keep thinking like hammers are easy, right? Jackhammer, sledgehammer,
Framing hammer versus.
framing hammer, claw hammer.
Foundation.
You know, a good woodworking folks and folks I know usually have about 6 hammers in their toolbox.
That's what I was
Versus a brand new person who does home repair has 1 in their toolbox.
Right.
Right, well, yeah, I have a claw hammer and a rubber mallet in my toolbox, right? My, my father, who is a retirement project, built his own house, had
At least.
8 hammers hanging on the
Right.
rack in his shop.
So you have to understand the environment for which all these tools are out there because they are successful in their environment.
And that's the point I have towards discoverability and a community that's sort of helping provide that easier evaluation. If you have a group of folks in your industry, framing, let's say, if you're building houses, they have 6 hammers that they favor. Now, some of those folks go out on a limb, try new stuff, find the latest, greatest thing, or find that this other one is cheap and dumb, or this one never gets used. They build that experience. How easily you can tap into that, that's the missing link a lot of the time. I know Wikipedia is a good place to find comparisons. It's not the be-all, end-all, but it was one thing I discovered that is like, oh wow, here's something that gives you a lot of, if you need a full-fledged text editor tool. Hey, there's a whole list that compares them and things that have aged off when's the last time it's updated. It gives you that evaluation resource.
So maybe the model is more like a contractor model is the future, because there are going to be so many different tools called for in a given project, right? That in a small company, hiring FTEs that only have deep experience in a small number of tools, it doesn't pay off well, because you end up needing someone that has expertise in, you've got to maintain some other component.
Somebody who can tighten the third bolt on the right rear wheel.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I'm just
The problem is that then I've lost, I've hired that guy just to tighten those bolts.
Now he's gonna be waiting a lot.
And he leaves, and I've lost the knowledge, right? There's no.
Right. Maintaining that widget.
There's
depends on the strategic importance of having that guy standing by if you need him at a moment's notice versus the flexibility of not having to standardize on a given set of tools that meets whatever smaller resources that you've got. I don't know. It's an interesting.
But that argument goes like for having siloed roles versus role agnosticism, and what works better in an agile team versus the old world with totally
I've
siloed.
heard the argument lately that you want an agile team where everybody is
T-shaped.
Where everybody's T-shaped, but where everybody's doing functionally the same thing, right? Which I think is nonsense.
Yeah, I've never seen that happen.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense.
Well, I guess that's where I was saying a T. You have breadth, but you haven't.
Depth in one.
Right.
Well, yeah. If you've got people whose T's overlap in a useful way.
Yeah. Maybe it's more of a pie symbol where some people are.
And
there are 2 areas of expertise.
Nice. I don't know, just to get on with the silly analogies to tools that we're doing, I mean, you imagine like a new home buyer that's young and they have to go to Home Depot and buy a shovel. They'll get the cheapest one with the wood handle, right? And it's like once you have got a little experience, you buy the one with the fiberglass handle because it's not going to break on you. You're not going to be on your 4th
And now it's not the cheapest.
Yeah, it's not the cheapest. It's the same thing with the yellow ladders versus the aluminum ones. It's a
After your first snow season, you go and get a square shovel.
Right. But it's there's got to be some way to figure out and evaluate how robust should I get my tool set so that it will last me for a long time versus if it lasts a long time, it's going to be out of date before I have full life out of it, before it wears out.
But the barrier towards that evaluation is the same one that brings us the diversity of tools in the first set, which is, well, capitalism, right? So we have these companies competing, and then people often do open source projects, and nobody's going to be, you're not going to get a straight evaluation if people are trying to be completely honest with you about, I like this tool because it's, you know, it's the bomb.
Everybody's got a bias.
It's still, everybody's got a bias, and they can't help it. It's, you know, so it comes out of politics to some extent. And besides, there are managers, and don't take this personally. They make decisions. Like I was at a company where it spent $500,000 on this new test automation tool. It's going to solve all their problems, and it was going to be awesome. Well, it turned out it must have been a great demo, but the thing didn't work. And you know, setting up bugs, finding out, oh, that didn't work. Okay, send a bug. Oh, okay, they'll fix that one, and the vendor will fix that one for us. It's terrible.
One challenge I've seen with tools is that I know we have the analogy of hammers and stuff like that, but they are physical tools, so they have some inherent limitation of how many can be created. Software, people just crank out like anything, so that complexity of
It's just an order
and
it's just a scale.
and how they can be
Oh,
carried.
no, we have 3D printers.
How well people play in that space is important, because everyone needs to play a good role. Otherwise, they'll just trash the whole discovery system or whatever it is. So that becomes a big challenge, and that causes less motivation to reuse and help each other and all that stuff. But I do believe that open source type thing is a great thing here that can help, where we could all not do the same thing again and again.
Well, it's not, I think physical tools actually are going to vary more in the future
Probably.
because of 3D printers. Everybody will start experimenting.
But still, the analogy, you look at Visual Studio, that's like a 20-sided, three 20-sided flails, each with a different hammer / screwdriver head on them.
It's just like your one of those things. How many different Swiss Army knife thing tools, right?
Right.
They have
It's 12-dimensional. In other words, software, you aren't limited by physical form.
That's true.
And the other thing I've noticed is that costing itself, unfortunately with the developers' knowledge base ranging so much, there's juniors and seniors, and some people are extremely good.
Sure.
Costing becomes a very difficult thing. So my cost might be very high versus somebody else's cost of developing a tool might be very low. And now how do you cost it? And that becomes a big confusion to the organization. I might come up with 6 weeks.
And the cost of the
Not
users
even
to train and
It's
the users. That's
training and the.
Well, if you're a manager at a company like this, right, and you have some say into you're building out a new house or whatever, and you get to choose the binding to tools when projects are new. At least you hope you do. But in a lot of cases, what I see is those are built up organically, and they're not done strategically. They're not, the tool choice, the binding choice is done because of expediency. Whatever expertise you happen to have on the team at that given time is the tool that gets used. Sometimes that's the wrong strategic long-term choice because the tool is on the decline, or it's really hard to find replacement people that know about that tool and how to keep building out in the future. And a lot of, I think, the situations we get in today are caused by that type of organic or uncontrolled construction of new projects that are binding themselves to tools.
That's kind of part of an agile principle, though, of decentralizing decision-making, right? And letting decisions be made at the lowest level possible, that you don't need to get approval.
But having a scientific process of evaluating. In other words, you can commit to piloting by building a doghouse with that, and people on the team are responsible for helping push back and saying, okay, now if you scaled that doghouse to be our next house, our next big project, what's going to happen? What are the drawbacks? And having that critical review as part of that would help mitigate. It won't solve some of the
smart people make bad decisions in that
but it helps.
too.
But it helps defray that.
But the other danger of having completely independent agile teams is making sure that what they're building does integrate up. Right. Or I've seen that fail.
Me too. I've seen it fail very badly. Yeah.
Well, the other thing is that things change over time. Like I'm working on a project, somebody's got some unit tests and running mocks. Somebody else added some unit tests in MOQ. Somebody else came along and they're like, I like in substitute. So we're in the process, we're gonna add some more unit tests to this thing. It's like, I should probably pick one of those three things. But nobody is going to go and rewrite the stuff that was done.
Nobody
probably
rewrites
writing
our
Ruskin
life.
first.
Yeah.
I'm gonna guess. But they're not going to go back and say, let's rewrite this using a common tool. So
Because rewrite, and the minute you say the word rewrite to a manager, they're like, whoa, what did you just say?
yeah, they'll defund.
No.
Yeah, but the
That's not
thing
what we
is,
do.
that, what do you do? I mean, part of that proliferation is just time, right? This tool was chosen at this time because there was some set of circumstances. Time passes, the next tool comes in.
But what's the lifespan of that test?
Sure.
I mean, they're all being run.
Certainly longer than the tool.
Right, they're all being run today. The tool, I mean, the
Depends-
version
depends on the
whatever
project
it is,
you're
still
working on,
run.
obviously.
Yeah, so I mean, you've just done your pilot. You've had 3 things used, they've been tested in with Project X, and now that you're on to Project Y, setting a standard saying, okay, from now on, we're writing everything with
Take it
WOP,
easy.
or, yeah, exactly, fakes, or
Yeah.
I don't know. what
You're not
it
making it better, but you don't want to make it worse.
But picking at that point, saying, okay, we're gonna retire the use intentionally of these, of creating new ones for these, and here's how we're going to do maintenance of it. If it's an easy fix for an existing thing, yeah, we'll do it. But at this point, here's our cut point, at which point we switch it over to the adopted language.
So going back to
adopted tool.
the tools and houses analogy, essentially it's like, well, that was the code in 1969.
Yep.
You were reading the
Exactly,
kitchen.
exactly.
Now the code has changed. You have to change.
If you're touching
Yeah.
touching that
You need
outlet,
20
you need to put a
amp
TFI.
Right. Okay.
But if you don't need to replace the outlet, then
We can discuss this more over another beer.
I got
Thanks. This was. I sort of been hoping that we would do the discussion while I was talking, but having the discussion separated was fine. And thank you, because you all challenged my assumptions. You all had interesting ideas to share. Thank you for that. So
Thank
I'll.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having me. Next time I give this talk, I'll steal some of your ideas.
Yeah, please do.
Well, thank you very much.
No, again, my pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
And